The Longhouse burned with a hungry rage that made the night sky bleed orange. Ash fell like cursed snow across the Norwegian fjordland, coating Bjorn's shoulders as he kicked through the splintered door. His breath came in ragged clouds in the freezing October air. Inside, smoke clawed at his throat and stung his eyes until they watered. But he pressed forward, his sword still warm from the battle that had painted the settlement red. His crew had already scattered through the village like wolves through a sheep pen. He could hear their distant shouts, the crash of pottery, the wails of those who'd hidden poorly. Bjorn's chieftain, Halvard the Ruthless, had ordered them to take everything of value and burn what remained. This settlement had refused tribute for 3 seasons. Tonight was the reckoning. The Longhouse interior flickered with dying firelight. Overturned benches, shattered ale horns. A loom collapsed in the corner, its threads trailing across the packed earth floor like the entrails of some wooden beast. The main hall was empty, its occupants either fled or already dealt with outside. Bjorn moved deeper into the structure, past the central hearth where embers still glowed with defiant heat. That's when he heard it. A cough, soft, controlled, coming from the shadows beyond the sleeping quarters. His grip tightened on his sword hilt as he approached. The smoke was thicker here, pooling near the roof beams like trapped spirits. Through the haze, he saw her, a girl, barely a woman, chained to one of the support pillars. Iron shackles bit into her wrists, the metal dark with old rust, and perhaps something else, blood maybe, or soot. She sat with her back against the carved wood, her legs drawn up, her head tilted at an angle that suggested she'd been watching him since he entered. Bjorn stopped. His first thought was practical. A thrall perhaps left behind in the panic. But thralls didn't wear woolen dresses of that quality, even torn and filthy as hers was. And they certainly weren't chained inside longhouses during raids. They were assets, meant to be dragged away screaming, not abandoned to burn. "Who are you?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by smoke and violence. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him with eyes that reflected the firelight like polished amber, old eyes in a young face. Her hair hung in tangled waves the color of winter wheat, matted with ash. But it was her skin that caught his attention. Even through the grime and smoke shadows, he could see them. Marks, intricate runes carved or tattooed along her forearms, disappearing beneath her torn sleeves, spiraling up toward her shoulders. He'd seen ritual markings before, but nothing like this. These weren't the simple protection runes warriors bore, or the fertility symbols carved into door frames. These were older, stranger, formed in patterns that seemed to shift when he didn't look directly at them. "The others left me," she said finally. Her voice was steady, almost eerily calm for someone chained in a burning building. "They said I deserved to burn for what I'd done. What did you do?" A ghost of a smile crossed her face, bitter and knowing. "I told the truth when I should have lied." The roof groaned above them. A shower of sparks cascaded from a weakening beam. Bjorn knew he should leave. His men would be boarding the ship soon, laden with plunder and captives. Halvard would want to sail before dawn, before any neighboring settlements could organize a response. And yet, there was something in her eyes. Not pleading, not fear. Just a quiet defiance that reminded him uncomfortably of his sister before she died from fever 3 winters past. That same refusal to bend, even when the gods themselves seemed set against her. "Please," she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. "The key is on the peg. There." She gestured with her chin toward a darkened corner where a crude iron key hung on a wooden peg, almost invisible in the shadows. Bjorn hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave her. She wasn't his concern. This raid wasn't about rescue. It was about power, about reminding these northern settlements that Halvard's reach extended far beyond his own fjord. But his feet were already moving. He grabbed the key and knelt beside her. Up close, he could smell smoke in her hair, and beneath that, something else. Herbs, sage maybe, or something he didn't recognize. The runes on her skin seemed darker now, like old bruises. When he fitted the key into the first shackle, his fingers accidentally brushed one of the marks. She flinched, actually flinched, the first real emotion he'd seen from her. "Who marked you?" he asked as the first shackle fell away. "My father." She rubbed her freed wrist, red welts standing out against pale skin. "To protect me, or to curse me? I'm no longer certain which." The second shackle opened with a rusty shriek. She stood, unsteady for a moment, then found her balance. She was taller than he'd expected, nearly reaching his shoulder, and there was a leanness to her that spoke of weeks, maybe months, of insufficient food. "Why would your father chain you here?" "He didn't." She looked toward the Longhouse entrance where orange light pulsed like a heartbeat. "He's dead. Has been for 7 days. His brother did this, my uncle. He said I knew too much, that my very existence threatened everything they'd built. A beam crashed down in the main hall, sending up a pillar of sparks. The heat was becoming unbearable." Bjorn grabbed her arm, less gently than he meant to. "We need to move, now." She didn't resist as he pulled her toward a side entrance he'd spotted earlier, a low door that led toward the animal pens. They burst out into the cold October night, gasping clean air that tasted like salt and freedom. Around them the settlement was chaos. Fires burned in 6 places. His crewmates moved like shadows between buildings, their arms full of furs and weapons and anything else that could be carried. "Stay close," Bjorn ordered, already regretting his decision. What was he supposed to do with her now? He couldn't just let her go. She'd be caught by his men or die in the wilderness. But taking her meant questions he didn't want to answer. They skirted the edge of the settlement, keeping to the shadows. His ship, the Wave Dancer, waited at the rocky shore. Its dragon-head prow pointed toward open water. He could see figures already aboard, loading the night's plunder. "Bjorn!" A shout from behind. He turned to see Thorstein, one of Halvard's most loyal warriors, jogging toward them. The older man's beard was singed, his face blackened with soot. "Halvard wants everyone aboard. We sail in—" He stopped, noticing the girl. His eyes narrowed. "Who's this?" Bjorn's mind raced. "A thrall. Found her hiding in a grain store. Thought she might fetch a price in Kaupang." Thorstein grunted, looking her up and down with the cold assessment of a man evaluating livestock. "She's half-starved. Won't fetch much. Then I'll keep her for myself," Bjorn said, putting an edge in his voice that warned against further questions. Something flickered in Thorstein's expression, but he nodded. "Your choice. But hurry. Halvard's in a foul mood. We lost 3 men breaching the northern wall." As Thorstein jogged back toward the ships, the girl spoke quietly beside him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Bjorn started moving again toward the Wave Dancer. "You'll work for your passage. And if Halvard decides you're more trouble than you're worth, I won't be able to protect you." "I understand." But as they approached the ship, Bjorn wondered if he understood anything at all. He'd just lied to one of Halvard's most trusted men for a girl whose name he didn't even know, marked with runes he didn't recognize, who claimed her own family had tried to burn her alive. He was either the biggest fool in Norway, or the gods had just handed him a mystery he couldn't walk away from. Either way, by the time he helped her aboard the Wave Dancer and found a place for her among the bundled furs in the hold, he knew his life had just become considerably more complicated. The girl settled into the shadows without complaint, wrapping herself in a salt-stained cloak someone had left behind. In the dim light filtering through the deckboards above, those runes on her arms seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "What's your name?" Bjorn asked, before he climbed back to the deck. She looked at him for a long moment, and in her eyes he saw something ancient and tired and infinitely sad. "Astrid," she said. "My name is Astrid Eriksdottir. And before this is finished, you'll wish you'd left me in those chains." The Wave Dancer cut through the slate-grey waters of the Sonefjord like a knife through flesh, its square sail pregnant with the bitter autumn wind. 3 days had passed since the raid. 3 days of Bjorn sneaking food and water to Astrid in the hold while trying to avoid Halvard's scrutiny. The chieftain had been in a black mood since they'd sailed, pacing the deck and muttering about the men they'd lost, about the paltry plunder. about omens and the displeasure of the gods. Bjorn stood at the rail, watching the towering cliffs slide past on either side. Norway was a land of vertical stone and horizontal water, a place where mountains drowned themselves in the sea and emerged as islands. Grey clouds hung low enough to touch the highest peaks, promising snow before the week was out. The air tasted of salt and coming winter. "You've been distracted, Bjorn," the voice came from behind him. Cold as the wind off the glaciers, Bjorn turned to find Halvard himself approaching, his heavy cloak snapping in the breeze. The chieftain was a bear of a man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a beard braided with silver rings that clicked when he moved. Scars mapped his face like tributaries on a river, each one a story of survival. Just tired, lord. The raid was harder than expected. Halvard's pale eyes studied him, missing nothing. "Thorstein tells me you took a thrall for yourself. A girl?" "Yes, lord. Seemed a waste to leave her." "Show me." Bjorn's heart kicked against his ribs, but he kept his face neutral. "She's sleeping, lord." "In the hold." "Then wake her. I want to see what you valued enough to claim before the rest of the plunder was divided." There was no refusing without raising more suspicion. Bjorn led Halvard to the hold, climbing down the narrow ladder into the dim space that smelled of salt fish and damp wool. Astrid sat in the same spot he'd left her that morning, huddled in the cloak, her face lost in shadow. "Up," Bjorn said, trying to make his voice harsh, the voice of a man ordering property around. "The chieftain wants to see you." She rose slowly, painfully, and Bjorn realized she was performing, making herself seem weaker and less interesting than she was. Smart. When she stepped into the shaft of grey light from the deck hatch, she kept her marked arms hidden beneath the cloak. Halvard looked her over with all the warmth of a man examining a suspect fish. "What's your name, girl?" "Astrid, lord." She kept her eyes down, submissive. "Who was your master before?" A pause. "Eric Thornson, lord. He died in the fever last summer. His brother kept me after, but..." She let the sentence trail off, leaving implications. Halvard grunted. "Can you cook?" "Yes, lord. Weave." "Some, lord? Then you'll earn your keep." He turned to Bjorn. "Keep her out of the way. Feed her enough to work, no more. We have limited provisions until we reach Fjellstad." After Halvard climbed back to the deck, Astrid slumped against the hull, the performance dropping away. "He didn't recognize me. Should he have?" She looked up at him, and in the dim light her eyes were dark as the fjord water. "My father and yours did business. 3 years ago, maybe 4. A trade agreement for iron and timber. I watched from behind a screen while they negotiated. Your chieftain struck me even then, as a man who remembers faces. You met my father." "No, but I saw him. Olaf the Wise, they called him. He had kind eyes." "You have his nose." Bjorn felt something twist in his chest. His father had died 2 winters past, killed in a pointless border skirmish that had settled nothing. "How do you know these things?" "Because Eric Thornson was my father, and before he was poisoned by his own brother, he was Jarl of the Northern Reaches, controlling everything from Trondheim to the Lofoten Islands." The words hung in the salt-thick air like an accusation. Bjorn sat down heavily on a barrel of saltfish, his mind reeling. If she was telling the truth, then he hadn't rescued a simple thrall or even a Jarl-daughter from some minor holding. He'd freed the daughter of one of the most powerful men in Norway, a man whose death had left a power vacuum that 6 rival chieftains were scrambling to fill. "You're lying," he said. "But without conviction. I wish I were." She pulled up her sleeves, revealing the full extent of the runic markings. In better light, he could see they weren't tattoos, but something deeper, carved into the skin itself, and filled with some dark substance that had fused with her flesh. "My father marked me when I was 12. Volva told him I would either unite the clans or destroy them. He never told me which, but he knew I was dangerous, so he hid me. No marriages, no alliances, just absence, as if I didn't exist. Then why did your uncle chain you?" Her laugh was bitter. "Because a ghost can't inherit, but a living heir can. After my father died, his brother Sven claimed the jarldom. said my father had no legitimate children. Most believed him. Why wouldn't they? I'd never been presented, never been seen. But a few loyalists knew the truth. They tried to rally support, to put me forward as the rightful heir. Sven couldn't kill me openly without admitting I existed, so he locked me away, planning to let the next raid or fire solve his problem for him. He just didn't expect it to happen so soon, or for a man like you to interfere. Bjorn rubbed his face, feeling the weight of decisions he'd made without understanding their consequences. If this is true, every chieftain between here and Trondheim will want you either married off or dead. You're a threat to every claim, every alliance. Yes, and Halvard would sell me to the highest bidder or kill me himself if he thought it would buy him favor with Sven. Your chieftain is ambitious. Bjorn, men like that don't let opportunities slip away. Above them, footsteps pounded across the deck, shouts. The ship lurched as the crew adjusted the sail. Bjorn climbed halfway up the ladder and poked his head above deck. They were entering a narrower part of the fjord where the cliffs pressed close and the water turned dark as old blood. A long ship sat anchored ahead, blocking their passage. Halvard stood at the prow, his hand on his sword. Who are they? Thorstein had climbed partway up the mast for a better view. Flying Sven Eriksson's bannerlord, the black raven on red, Bjorn's blood went cold. He dropped back into the hold. We have a problem. Astrid's face had gone pale. He found out. Somehow he found out. Maybe, or maybe this is just bad luck. But Bjorn didn't believe in coincidence. Not this convenient. The wave dancer slowed, oars shipped as they approached the other vessel. Bjorn could see men lining its rails now, armed and watching. Not an overwhelming force, but enough to make any confrontation costly. A figure stood at the other ship's prow, tall and iron-haired, wearing a cloak of bearskin. Even at this distance, Bjorn could feel the weight of his authority. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed without question, Halvard the Ruthless. The voice carried across the water, deep and commanding. I am Sven Eriksson, Jarl of the Northern Reaches. I seek a fugitive who may have boarded your vessel during your recent activities. A girl marked with runes, wanted for crimes against her clan. On deck, Halvard turned, his eyes finding the hold entrance where Bjorn's head was visible. The message in those pale eyes was clear. Give her up. Bjorn pulled back down, his mind racing through options that all ended badly. If he surrendered Astrid, she'd die, probably before nightfall. If he tried to hide her, Halvard would tear the ship apart. And if he fought... There's a third option, Astrid said quietly, reading his face. Let me go. I'll tell them you didn't know who I was, that I deceived you. It might satisfy them enough that they won't take the ship. They'll kill you, probably. But better me than your entire crew. She stood, steady now, resigned. You tried. That's more than anyone else has done. Before Bjorn could respond, Halvard's voice boomed down from above. Bjorn, bring the girl, now. The two of them locked eyes in the dim hold. In hers, he saw acceptance, the calm of someone who'd already made peace with death. In that moment, she reminded him so much of his sister that his chest ached. Then, surprising himself, Bjorn made a decision that would either mark him as the greatest fool in Norway or something else entirely. No, he called up. I won't. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Halvard's face appeared in the hatch, contorted with rage. What did you say? I said no, Lord. This girl is under my protection. I claimed her legally according to our customs. She's mine, and I won't surrender her without cause. The Jarl himself demands her, you fool. Then let the Jarl come aboard and tell me what crimes she's committed. Let him swear before the gods that his claim is just. If he can do that, I'll consider his request. It was madness, and Bjorn knew it. He was one warrior against a chieftain and a jarl, backed by dozens of armed men. But something in him, some stubborn core of honor that his father had instilled, refused to simply hand over a helpless girl to the man who'd tried to burn her alive. Halvard's hand moved to his sword. You would defy me? Here now? I would ask that we handle this according to the law, Lord. As my father taught me, As yours taught you, for a long moment nothing moved. Then Halvard's face disappeared from the hatch, and Bjorn heard him shouting orders. The wave dancer's crew scrambled, weapons appearing, tension. Maybe. Bjorn checked his sword, making sure it would slide free easily. But at least I'll die standing up. Above them, the two ships began to close, and the grey fjord water between them shrank, like the space between breaths, waiting for the violence to come. The confrontation didn't come immediately, which somehow made it worse. The two ships sat facing each other across 50 feet of dark water, armed men on both sides, while Halvard and Sven conducted a shouted negotiation that would determine whether this day ended in dialogue or slaughter. Bjorn stood on deck now, having been summoned up by a grim-faced Thorstein. Astrid remained below, but he could feel her presence like a weight on his shoulders. The crew of the wave dancer had arranged themselves along the rails, hands never far from weapons, their faces carrying the resigned tension of men who knew violence was coming, but didn't know when. The October wind cut through gaps in Bjorn's armor, raising gooseflesh on his arms. Around them, the fjord cliffs loomed like judges carved from stone, their peaks lost in low clouds that promised snow. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp as broken glass. "He's stalling," Thorstein muttered beside Bjorn. The older warrior's hand rested on his axe, his knuckles white. "Sven is. See how he keeps asking questions, demanding details. He's waiting for something." Bjorn followed the man's gaze and felt his stomach drop. There, at the far end of the fjord, two more sails had appeared. Reinforcements. Sven had planned this ambush carefully, positioning ships at both ends of the Narrows. The wave dancer was trapped. Halvard saw them too. His face darkened, and when he turned to look at Bjorn, there was murder in his eyes. But there was also calculation. The chieftain was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He understood that his options had just narrowed considerably. Bjorn Olafsson. Sven's voice carried across the water again, and this time it was addressed directly to him. "I am told you are the one harboring the fugitive. Step forward." Bjorn moved to the rail, feeling every eye on both ships turned toward him. Up close, Sven Eriksson was even more imposing than he'd appeared at a distance. His face was all hard angles and old scars, his beard shot through with silver that caught the weak sunlight. But it was his eyes that held Bjorn, pale as winter ice and just as cold. "I am Bjorn Olafsson, son of Olaf the Wise," he called back, putting iron in his voice despite the hammering of his heart. "The girl you harbor is a traitor and a murderer. She conspired in the death of her own father, my brother Eric. She carries marks of dark sorcery that mark her as vulva-touched, dangerous to all who shelter her. Surrender her now and I will be satisfied. Refuse, and I will take her by force, along with your ship and everything on it." It was a masterful lie, Bjorn realized, delivered with such conviction that even some of Halvard's crew were looking at him with doubt. Who would risk everything for a murderess? A sorceress? "If these charges are true," Bjorn called back, "then bring witnesses. Let them testify before both crews, before the gods themselves. The old law demands proof before judgment." Sven's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. "The old law also says that a Jarl's word is proof enough in his own domain. And you, boy, are in my domain now. Movement on the reinforcement ships. Men preparing to board smaller boats, readying for an assault. They had perhaps minutes before this turned bloody. Bjorn!" Halvard's voice was quiet, controlled, which made it more dangerous than any shout. "Give her up now, while we still can negotiate terms." "No, Lord. Then you condemn us all for a girl you've known for 3 days. Is that your father's wisdom speaking, or just a young man's foolishness?" It was a fair question. Bjorn knew he was being reckless, letting emotion guide action in a way his father would have counseled against. But something deeper than logic was at work here, some instinct that told him this moment mattered, that some stands had to be taken regardless of the cost. "I will not surrender an innocent to be murdered without trial," he said. "If that makes me a fool, so be it." Halvard stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine regret. "You're a better man than I am, Bjorn, but better men die just as dead." Then, loud enough for both crews to hear, "I am Halvard, chieftain of the Fjellstad territories. I will not surrender my ship or my men without a fight. But neither am I fool enough to die for another man's cause." He turned to Thorstein. "Bring the girl up. We'll let the Jarl take her and hope he's satisfied with that." "No!" Bjorn's hand went to his sword, but Thorstein was already moving toward the hold, along with two other warriors. Everything slowed down. Bjorn saw it all with perfect clarity, saw his choices crystallize into a single bright point. He could back down, let them take Astrid, live to see another day, survive, as his father had taught him, or he could do something monumentally stupid. He drew his sword. The ring of steel was absurdly loud in the tense silence. Every man on both ships froze, suddenly aware that the moment of decision had arrived. "I challenge you, Sven Eriksson." Bjorn's voice didn't shake, which surprised him. "I challenge your right to judge this woman without trial. I demand Holmgang, single combat, witnessed by both crews, with the gods as judges. If I win, the girl goes free and your pursuit ends. If you win, take her and welcome." It was an ancient custom, rarely invoked in these modern times, but still recognized by law. A trial by combat binding on both parties. The risk was enormous. Sven was older, more experienced, and fighting with the confidence of a man who'd survived dozens of battles. Bjorn was young, untested in single combat, and tired from the raid, but it was the only move he had left. Sven's face registered surprise, then something that might have been respect. "You would die for her, a girl you barely know." "I would die before surrendering someone to false justice. My father taught me that honor matters more than survival." "Your father was a fool too then." But Sven was nodding, accepting. "Very well. Holmgang it is. Tomorrow at dawn on the island ahead. We'll beach both ships and prepare the field. Tonight, we both have time to contemplate our choices." As the tensions eased slightly and men began preparing for the formal combat, Halvard grabbed Bjorn's arm, pulling him aside. His grip was iron. "What have you done?" the chieftain hissed. "Sven has killed 11 men in formal combat. 11. He's called the Raven for a reason. Bjorn, he picks corpses clean." "I know." "Lord, then you know you're going to die." Bjorn looked toward the hold where Astrid waited, hidden but surely hearing everything. "Maybe, but at least I'll die knowing I tried to do what was right." Halvard released him, something complicated passing across his scarred face. "Your father would be proud of you, and furious at your stupidity." He paused. "I'll make sure your portion of the plunder goes to your mother." Small comfort, I know. That night, they beached both ships on the small island Sven had indicated. It was barely more than a rock, thrust up from the fjord floor like a broken tooth, its surface worn smooth by 10,000 years of wind and water. While the crews from both ships prepared the combat ground, marking out the traditional square with hazel branches and stones, Bjorn sat with Astrid away from the others. She'd been quiet since learning of the challenge, her face pale in the firelight. The runes on her arms seemed darker than before, or perhaps that was just the shadows. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally. "I know. You're going to die for me. A stranger, maybe." Bjorn watched the fires reflecting off the fjord water. "My father used to say that a man's worth isn't measured by the years he lives, but by the choices he makes when those choices cost him something. I could have handed you over, lived another 40 years, died warm in my bed surrounded by grandchildren. But I'd have known every day that I'd surrendered an innocent to be murdered for political convenience. That price seemed higher than death." Astrid was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "My father used to say something similar. He said that power without principle was just another word for tyranny." She held out her hands, showing him the marks. "These runes, Bjorn, they're not decorative. The Volva who carved them said they would protect me from those who would use me as a tool. But she also said they would ensure I could never hide from my fate." "What is your fate?" "I don't know. Unite the clans or destroy them. That was the prophecy. But how can I do either from a grave? Maybe that's why I'm here, Bjorn said. To make sure you get the chance to find out. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold. Win tomorrow, please. Not for me, but for yourself. You deserve to see what kind of man you'll become. They sat together through the night, watching the stars appear between breaks in the clouds, listening to the fjord water lap against stone. And if Bjorn's courage wavered in the dark hours before dawn, thinking of Sven's reputation and his own inexperience, he didn't show it. Some fears were meant to be carried alone. When the sun rose, pale and weak through the grey clouds, both crews gathered around the combat square. Sven stood ready, wearing light leather armor and carrying a sword that had clearly seen decades. Bjorn faced him across the hazel branches, his own sword feeling heavy in his grip. He'd barely slept, and his arms ached from the raid. But his mind was clear, focused on the simple truth that all his choices had led to this moment. "Any last words?" Sven asked, not unkindly. "Just this," Bjorn replied. "The girl's name is Astrid Eriksdottir. She's your niece, your own blood. And if you kill me today, and take her anyway, the gods will know that you murdered family for power. That stain doesn't wash off." Something flickered in Sven's eyes, there and gone. Then he raised his sword. "Begin!" They came together in the center of the square, steel ringing against steel, and the fjord held its breath to watch. The combat was brutal and brief, nothing like the heroic duels sung about in the mead halls. Sven came at Bjorn with the methodical efficiency of a craftsman, testing his defenses with quick probing strikes, looking for weaknesses. Bjorn gave ground, his younger legs carrying him backward as he parried desperately, knowing that one mistake would be his last. The older man's sword caught him on the shoulder, a glancing blow that split leather and drew first blood. Pain flared hot and immediate. The watching crews shouted, Sven's men cheering, Halvard's warriors grimly silent. "You fight well for a boy," Sven said, circling. "But this ends now." He surged forward with a combination that should have broken through Bjorn's guard, should have ended it. But something happened in that moment. Some instinct born of desperation, or perhaps just luck. Bjorn didn't try to match the older warrior's strength. Instead, he gave way completely, dropping to one knee and letting Sven's sword pass overhead. Then lunging upward, with his own blade aimed at the gap between armor and belt. It was a move his father had taught him years ago, practicing in their courtyard. "A move for when you're overmatched," his father had said. "Use their strength against them." The blade bit deep into Sven's side, sliding between ribs. The Jarl's eyes went wide with shock. He staggered back, blood spreading across his tunic like spilled wine. His sword fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. For a moment nobody moved. The entire island seemed frozen in disbelief. Then Sven dropped to his knees, one hand pressed against the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. Bjorn stood over him, his own sword raised for a killing blow, and time stretched out. This was the moment. Finish it, end the threat. It would be legal, witnessed by both crews. Sven had accepted the challenge, accepted the terms. But looking down at the wounded man, seeing the shock fading into resignation in those pale eyes, Bjorn hesitated. This wasn't a battle frenzy. This wasn't self-defense against an attacking enemy. This was execution, and something in him balked at it. "Yield," he said. Sven looked up at him, confusion replacing resignation. "What?" I said. "Yield. You're beaten. The gods have spoken. But I won't kill a wounded man on his knees. Yield and let this end here. If I yield, you'll just let me go. No, you'll swear an oath here before both crews and the gods. You'll acknowledge Astrid as your brother's true daughter and abandon any claim against her. You'll allow her to sail north with us, to Trondheim, where the clan leaders can hear her case. And you'll provide escort ships to ensure our safe passage." It was audacious, demanding terms from the man he'd just defeated. But Bjorn pressed on. "Or refuse, and I finish this." "Your choice." Sven's hand trembled against his wound. Blood pooled beneath him on the stone, dark as the fjord water. Around them, warriors from both sides watched in silence, waiting for the Jarl's decision. This was unprecedented. Holmgang usually ended in death, not negotiation. "You're either very wise or very foolish." Sven said, his voice strained with pain. I cannot decide which. Neither can I, Bjorn admitted. But I know that killing you solves nothing. Your death creates another succession crisis, more blood feuds, more chaos. Norway is tearing itself apart. Maybe it's time someone chose a different path. For a long moment, Sven simply stared at him, weighing options with a mind still sharp despite the pain. Then slowly he nodded. Very well, I yield. And I swear before the gods and these witnesses that Astrid Eriksdotter is my brother's true-born daughter, that my claim against her is withdrawn, and that I will provide safe escort to Trondheim for her to present herself to the assembled Jarls. A murmur ran through both crews. Several of Sven's men looked outraged, but none moved. The oath had been witnessed. To break it now would be to forfeit all honor, all standing among their people. Thorstein stepped forward, his weathered face unreadable. Let me see the wound. While the older warrior examined Sven, calling for bandages and fresh water, Astrid emerged from the watching crowd. She moved slowly, deliberately, until she stood before her uncle. The two regarded each other across a chasm wider than blood, deeper than betrayal. Why did you do it? She asked quietly. My father loved you. Trusted you? Why? Sven's laugh was bitter and pained. Because your father was weak. He saw the world as he wanted it to be, not as it was. His secret daughter, born of a forbidden liaison with a vulva. He thought he could hide you away, protect you from the politics, let you grow up safe. But secrets don't stay buried, Astrid. And when the other Jarls learned of your existence, they saw opportunity. Marriages to be arranged, alliances to be forged. Your father's refusal to use you as a political tool made him look weak to them. So you poisoned him. I saved his legacy. Sven's voice rose, then cracked with pain. With him dead and you hidden, I could unite the clans under strong leadership. Without the distraction of his sentiment, his foolish love for a daughter who should never have been born. Astrid's face was carved from ice. You didn't save anything. You just spread the rot deeper. My father's way wasn't weakness, Uncle. It was the only thing that might have held us together. Love, trust, honor, the things you threw away for power. She turned away from him then, dismissing him in a way that was more devastating than any words. Moving to Bjorn's side, she touched his wounded shoulder gently. Thank you. Again, apparently I'll be spending my life in your debt. No debt, Bjorn said. Just try to make it worth it. Whatever you do next, make this mean something. I will. I swear it. The journey to Trondheim took another week, with Sven's ships flanking the Wave Dancer in an escort that was part honor guard, part prison watch. The wounded Jarl remained aboard his own vessel, recovering under the care of his warriors while nursing both his wound and his humiliation. True to his word, he made no moves against them, though Bjorn kept Astrid close and his sword closer. Halvard, for his part, seemed torn between fury at the complications Bjorn had brought upon them and grudging respect for how it had played out. Your father would have handled it differently, he told Bjorn one evening as they sailed past mountains that glowed pink in the sunset. Probably better. But he'd have been proud you tried. Will you speak for her? Bjorn asked. When we reach Trondheim? Your voice carries weight among the Jarls. The chieftain was quiet for a long time. I'll speak truth as I saw it, that you risked everything to protect someone you believed was innocent, that Sven tried to have her killed without trial. Beyond that, he shrugged, the Jarls will decide what they decide. Politics has its own logic, separate from justice. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. They reached Trondheim on a morning when frost painted the world silver, and their breath came in white clouds. The city sprawled along the Nidelva River, a collection of longhouses and trade stalls and warehouses that served as the beating heart of Norwegian commerce and power. Word of their coming had preceded them, carried by fast ships and faster rumors. When the Wave Dancer docked, half the city seemed to be waiting on the shore. The assembly hall was ancient, its timbers dark with age and smoke, its walls decorated with shields bearing the symbols of every major clan in Norway. Inside, the Jarls had gathered, powerful men and women who controlled vast territories and commanded thousands of warriors. They sat on benches arranged in a circle, faces hard as the mountains they ruled, waiting to judge whether Astrid was a threat, an opportunity, or simply another complication in an already complicated world. Bjorn stood beside her as she entered, feeling the weight of all those eyes. She'd cleaned up during the voyage, borrowed proper clothes, and bound her hair in the style of a woman of station. But nothing could hide the runes that marked her arms, stark and strange in the torchlight. The senior Jarl, a woman named Gunhild, whose family had held the north for 3 generations, spoke first. Astrid Eriksdottir, you claim your father was Erik Thornson, Jarl of the Northern Reaches. You claim you were hidden away, then imprisoned by your uncle after your father's death. These are serious accusations. What proof do you offer? Astrid stepped forward, and her voice when she spoke was clear and steady. I offer the word of warriors who risked everything to protect me. I offer my uncle's own oath, sworn before witnesses, acknowledging my blood. I offer these marks, she held out her arms, given to me by the Volva Hild Ravenseeker, under my father's direction, when I was 12 winters old. Any among you who remember my father will remember that he bore identical marks on his own shoulders, hidden beneath his clothing, signs of a prophecy that troubled him until his death. A murmur. Astrid took a breath. That his bloodline would either unite the clans of Norway under a single banner, ending centuries of feuding, or bring about their complete destruction through civil war. The Volva could not say which. My father spent his life trying to navigate between these futures, and it killed him. Now that burden falls to me, bold words, said another Jarl, a grizzled man called Ragnar the Stone. But what makes you think you're the one to unite us? You're young, untried, barely known. Why should any of us follow you? You shouldn't, Astrid said simply. Not yet. I haven't earned your trust, haven't proven myself worthy. But I ask for the chance to try. Let me travel among the clans. Let me learn their needs, their grievances, their dreams. Let me work to build bridges instead of burning them. And if, after 1 year, you judge that I've failed, then I'll set aside any claim to leadership and live out my days in obscurity. But give me that year. Give peace a chance before we drown in more blood. It was a good speech, Bjorn thought. Humble enough to be believable, ambitious enough to be inspiring. But would it be enough? The Jarls deliberated for hours, while Bjorn and Astrid waited outside, watching the river flow past, silver in the October light. Winter was coming, that long Norwegian winter that turned the world to ice and darkness. But spring would follow, as it always did. The question was what world they'd find when the thaw came. Finally, as the sun touched the western mountains, they were called back inside. Gunhild stood, her face unreadable. We have decided. Astrid Eriksdottir, your blood claim is recognized. You are acknowledged as the daughter of Erik Thornson. However, given your youth and inexperience, you will not immediately assume your father's position. Instead, you will serve as an emissary, traveling among the clans under our collective protection, working to build the alliances and understanding necessary for future leadership. After 1 year, we will reconvene and assess your progress. If you have demonstrated wisdom and capability, your claim to full leadership will be considered. Does this satisfy you? Astrid bowed deeply. It is more than I dared hope for. Thank you. Thank Bjorn Olafsson, Gunhild said, her eyes shifting to him. His defense of you, his victory in Holmgang, and his mercy towards Sven spoke volumes about your character. People are judged by those willing to stand for them. You chose your defender well. Later, standing on the dock as cargo was unloaded and crews prepared for winter quarters, Astrid turned to Bjorn. The runes on her arms seemed quieter now in the fading light, less ominous somehow. So what happens next? She asked. You travel, I suppose. Do your emissary work. Try to heal the wounds that men like Sven have inflicted. And you? Bjorn looked out at the fjord, at the mountains beyond, at the vast, complicated world his choice had helped preserve. Halvard will need warriors for his crew come spring, and my mother will want to know her son survived his foolishness. Beyond that, I don't know. Take it 1 day at a time, I suppose. Would you consider traveling with me? The question was quiet, almost hesitant. As a guard? An advisor? Someone who remembers what it means to choose honor over convenience? I'll need people around me who can do that, Bjorn considered. It would mean leaving Halvard's service, striking out on a path with no clear destination. It would mean more danger, more uncertainty, more moments where a single choice could mean life or death. It would mean everything his father had warned him about, and everything his father had prepared him for. Yes, he said, I think I would. She smiled then, genuine warmth breaking through the political mask she'd worn in the assembly hall. Good, because I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'll need all the help I can get. They stood together as the sun set over Trondheim, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Behind them, the assembly hall was emptying, jarls and warriors dispersing to prepare for winter. Around them, the city continued its evening rhythms, traders calling final prices, children running through the streets, life continuing in all its messy, complicated glory. Somewhere in the mountains, snow was already falling, covering the old world in white, preparing the ground for whatever grew next. And on the dock, two young people who'd found each other by chance or fate or the whim of gods stood watching darkness gather, knowing that morning would come, and with it, choices that would shape not just their lives, but the fate of the clans they served. The Viking had found a girl chained in a longhouse and learned she was the Jarl's hidden daughter. Now, as winter closed its grip on Norway, they would discover together what that meant, what prophecies demanded, and whether two people guided by honor rather than ambition could actually change anything at all. The fjord water lapped against the dock, patient as stone, waiting for spring and the answers it would bring.